Santelices, and I'm the director of the Center for Intercultural Education and Development at Georgetown University. I want to thank all of our presenters and participants for joining us today for our conference on responsible organizations in the global context. This conference has been organized by CIED, the Center for Intercultural Education and Development at Georgetown, and Université de Versailles Saint-Quentin. And it is a manifestation of our fruitful and long-lasting relationship. I want to take a moment to thank Professor Philippe Hermel and Professor Annie Bartoli for their leadership and tireless work to make this conference possible. Thank you. This is indeed a fitting topic, given the critical challenges that we face in the world today. So to open the conference on behalf of Georgetown University, I am delighted to introduce Dean Norberto Grzywacz, Georgetown University's Dean of the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences and Professor of Physics and Neuroscience. Dr. Grzywacz has gained worldwide recognition for his research, his work, and his expertise in leading interdisciplinary research teams. Dr. Grzywacz.
I think it's very fitting to have both Georgetown University and the University of Versailles co-organizing this conference because of the interest of both these universities in social responsibility and responsible management. For Georgetown University in particular, hosting this event is very, very fitting. Our president, Dr. Jacques DeJoy, have often expressed the vision for the university in three components. The first two, of course, are research and education, and that is commonly shared by many of the leading universities in the world. The third, which is important, is the constructing of the common good. The university, Georgetown University, is very committed to this goal, and having an event on when you think of organizations and how they can be socially responsible fit very well with what we want to do here at this university. Many of the programs we have been creating or are creating currently have exactly the flavor of what this conference is about. To give you an example, recently Georgetown University and Bank Santander from Spain joined forces to create a program on social economy where questions of financial inclusion, health inclusion, etc., are being addressed by a multitude of panels and workshops. Now, I think it is important that when you tackle a problem as complex and as urgent as socially responsible organizations, that you look at it for multiple angles. It's not a simple problem. And I have to say, I actually read the abstracts for this conference. I took the material sent to me, and I was very impressed by the breadth of the ways that those topics are being addressed. So, for example, issues of management are being addressed, but at the same time, there are conversations on ethics, there are conversations on public policy, on environment, on healthcare, on technology. All those issues need to come together when talking about responsible organizations. It is really, in order to tackle such complex problem, you have to do it by combining the efforts of multiple disciplines. The second focus of the conference, of course, is the global context. Georgetown University, again, and you'll see this if you go around our campus or Washington, have a very strong international orientation. You know, we are in Washington, we are in a city where a lot of those forces converge. And because of our history, we want to have not just an interaction with the United States, but an interaction that spans the globe. When you think of bringing the international, this global context, you immediately see that the problem is as complex as doing social responsible organizations. You have to deal with things like international affairs. You have to deal with human development. You have to deal with the very complex issue of having multiple cultures interacting in a similar environment. And how do you actually manage the situation? So to me, this interdisciplinary characteristic of the conference fits very well with what we are looking for in this university, fits very well with the programs we are trying to create. I think it is a way to create new leaders in the world that are not stuck on particular viewpoints. I encourage you during the conference to talk to peers that are far from your field and learn those issues, especially the students, because when you are really going to tackle those very complex and urgent problems, you have to have a breadth of points of views to address the issues. So again, I'd like to welcome you all. This is a very exciting conference to us at Georgetown, to me personally, and I'm looking forward to hearing some of the presentations. Thank you so much.
I just wanted to speak a little bit about the McDonough School of Business. I'm sure you're very curious to hear about it as I'm welcoming you here. The McDonough School of Business is a school with a purpose. We really try to educate principal leadership, principal leaders who care about ethics and integrity. We also want our students to care not only about business, but about society and the interface between the two. And finally, we try to support a global mindset in everything we do. Many schools have similar vague and ambitious statements, but here at Georgetown, we actually deliver on it based on our long tradition of trying to achieve those goals, but also being a Jesuit university in Washington, D.C., which is the greatest capital city in the world, after the one where you guys come from. So having this kind of purpose, we materialize it in the kinds of programs that we have, right? Outside of the traditional suite of programs, we have master programs in leadership, a master's program in international business and politics. We are going to have a new one soon on management and politics. We are, of course, known for a global executive MBA, which is very well ranked. That's one materialization of that purpose. Another materialization is that in our traditional programs, we have very lively initiatives such as the Global Business Experience. Many of the Georgetown people who you will hear today are involved in those, whereby we send students to solve problems, business problems everywhere in the world. We also have a certificate in non-market strategies whereby our MBA students understand the interface between business and organizations, especially the ones that are here in DC. So based on this purpose and all these program features, we are very successful. One of the reasons faculty join our school and university is the amazing quality of our students. We managed to be one of the most selective undergraduate programs. We have an excellent MBA program. So that's a really enjoyable environment. And also we have a very global faculty, coming from all horizons. And it's with pleasure that I notice that so many of them are going to be involved in this besides myself. Of course, José Luis Guerrero is one of the key organizers of this wonderful conference. Doug McKay will be here. Charlie Scuba is there in front of me. Janine Turner will be there too. So I just hope that you will enjoy the environment, that you take the time to walk through the campus a little bit. The day is going to be great. And tomorrow, too, don't listen to the forecasters. They are usually wrong in this area. So hopefully you have a great conference, and I'll see you later. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I am Benoit Petit, Vice President of the University of Versailles. And firstly, I would like to thank the Dean of the Graduate School of Art and Science and the Executive Director of the CIED for hosting us, and also Professor Bartoli and Professor Hermel for their organization of the conference today. It's an honor for me to represent the University of Versailles today at the opening of this very important conference regarding its participants as well as the topics that will be discussed today. As you know, the University of Versailles is extremely attached to contribute to the advance of scientific knowledge for sustainable development, and a significant part of its international reputation, as identified in all major international academic rankings, is based on this line of transdisciplinary research. And I must here congratulate the whole team of the LAREQUOI Research Center, who is very proactive in this area and who does a remarkable job since many years now. Let me also take the opportunity of this tribune to remind you all the importance that we attach at Versailles to international cooperations in terms of research and education, and especially cooperations of the quality of that which unites us with Georgetown University. As Vice President in charge of the strategy of the Versailles University, I can assure you we will consolidate and develop these exchanges for the future for the purposes of offering to our students training courses of a new kind, to our researchers vanguard scientific projects, and to, of course, our international partners, academic opportunities that will lead us to weigh together on major global issues. So thank you all for your very warm welcome. Thank you all for your friendship. And be sure that you are all welcome to Versailles, where we have so much to create together. And I wish you all a great conference today.
Well, thank you very much, all the speakers before me, and also the organizer of this conference, Professor Guerrero, who is here. And I was very pleased to meet him in December in Versailles, because as we are in the framework of cooperation, he came to France and to make some lecture to our students. But nevertheless, more than 2,000 students come there, here, in your university. And it was the concretization, yeah, why not, of a very strong cooperation during more than 10 years. And during 10 years, this cooperation was very intensive with all the students who come there for 1 week or more sometimes, and also for research exchanges like this conference today, with this very interesting topic, as you mentioned, but also, and I hope, and I am pleased that our Vice President says that for the future we have to think about what we will do, because we are rich of our history, and we are also rich for our perspective. And I know that there is some project, and perhaps Philippe or Annie will say something about this project, because we have to go ahead for the future of our students, of our researchers, and so on. I am very pleased also because it is like I am at home here. Why? Because the welcome is very nice, and I want to thank you again, but also because I am with a very large part of our team. We are here with a large part of the administrative team, of the support team, of teaching and research team, and also with PhD students. So it is like a part of our institute is here now, today, and tomorrow. And I am also very pleased because I want to thank you, Sylvie Faucheux, to be there. Professor Faucheux was the former president of our university, and she was a very important support for the our institute. It's why I want also to notice that, and even if she is not here, she will have the opportunity to explain a lot of things if needed during the 2 days. So, thank you very much for this cooperation, and thank you very much also for the dimension that is more important than only our institution. It's why I am very pleased to meet Mrs. Pham, who is here now, and she represents the French embassy. And it's very important that we continue to concretize, to make something very important, that we are the actors of the international cooperation in this frame of research, but also for the economic point of view, because we, as you said, we are here to train and to have the new leader. You say that? And that's true. And it's why, even if we are in our institute, this cooperation is also very more important for that. And the presence here of Mrs. Pham is very important for us too, and as proof of this interest that we can have in the French and US cooperation. So thank you very much to everybody.
So good morning, everyone. So my name is Minh-Hà, and as it has been said, I'm the Counselor for Science and Technology at the French Embassy. So dear professors, dear colleagues, on behalf of the Embassy of France in the United States, it's my great pleasure to be here today to give a short address for the opening of this first conference on responsible organizations in the global context. As the French Counselor for Science and Technology, my mission, as it has been said, is to help and facilitate the creation or the strengthening of transatlantic research cooperation and to increase the mobility of students and faculty members between France and the United States. Therefore, I'm particularly pleased to attend this meeting, which gathers international representatives of many countries. I heard that it's something like 29 countries, which has been registered, and which has been organized both by Georgetown University and by the University of Versailles-Saint-Quentin. Actually, the agreement between the two universities, signed more than 10 years ago, I think, has led to a success story, allowing the regular organization of week-long seminars open to French and international students, as well as to international faculty members or managers. Today's conference is the illustration of this strong partnership between professors of these French and American universities and other universities in the world, and shows their ability to gather the international community of experts in the field of the science of business and management, but also in the field of health, culture, communication, education, etc. I would like to stress that the topic of the conference is especially challenging today, and it is of great interest to use multidisciplinary approaches to address the question of the responsibility of organizations. In my current position, being both a scientist by training and a diplomat, I'm fully aware of the importance of promoting conversation between science and society, and your conference is precisely dealing with this issue. Therefore, I would like to congratulate the organizers of this very inspiring conference, in particular Professor Philippe, Hermel, and Professor Annie Bartoli, whom I had the pleasure to meeting 2 days ago. And I would like to tell you that the Embassy will be keen in supporting this cooperation between Georgetown University and University of Versailles, which is a wonderful example of French-American cooperation in research. And I wish you an excellent and fruitful meeting. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I don't have to tell you this, but welcome to Have to Press. You guys, let's begin again. You guys, first of all, it's a pleasure to have you here. Welcome to Georgetown University. I'm Professor Guerrero from the Business School. And for us to have you here talking about responsible organization is an extremely important element. Let me mention to you what we thought at the beginning. In order to create an international conference, we take a look at a topic so important like responsible organization. But the question was, when we were thinking with Philippe and Annie, what is a responsible organization? And we were so excited about the topic, many questions came to our mind. Which are the limits of a responsible organization? Does the culture influence how the responsible organization recreate? Are there new challenges for these organizations? If we asked somebody 10 years ago what was a responsible organization, perhaps this person would be very concerned about environment, social responsibilities, discriminations. Now, as we're looking at the new era, in which all the information is moved around from one place to another, new challenges come to us. The idea was to create a conference in which perhaps you could give us some of those answers. If you look at the program which my colleague Annie is going to develop later on, we could see that the myriad of topics that you're going to have here is a convolution of ideas, the idea in which way we could approach responsible organization in a global context. When I say global context, it doesn't refer only to the number of countries that we have, but there's a cultural component that is extremely important. I don't want to say there are certain things that are less important in one country or another, but we need this cohesion of ideas in order to try to find the answer. This conference is not only a theoretical conference. As you could see, you will have the business part, you will have the papers, and also very importantly, the areas in which the students are going to be promoting some of the ideas. Georgetown, as you know very well in Washington, is very well positioned with respect to the idea of social responsibility and also responsible organization. But at the same time, without the joint work of different cultures and different universities, it would be very difficult to answer the question. It's going to be a very intense, but at the same time, interesting topic to talk. Once again, what I want to do is to thank everybody, especially the people here. I appreciated your stay here, and all of you, because all of us are stakeholders in this conference, and the idea is to exchange ideas and try to solve some of the problems. Thank you again, and welcome to Georgetown University.
Good morning, bonjour, buenos dias, guten Tag, buongiorno, that's it. Okay. Do you know that the way to start a speech varies a lot according to the countries? It's just like speaking to someone, you can say the first name, the last name, doctor, professor, sometimes a nickname, as I was told this morning. So, well, it's there are various ways to speak about all this, and it's just something that we have to be aware of because we are in an international conference, aren't we? So that's something very, very important. For instance, let me give you some examples. Usually, Americans start their speech with a joke, and they often mention something about their family. Have you noticed that? If you take another example, we can also mention that in some Asian countries, it's very frequent to apologize for something before you get to the point. That's something else. Let me give other examples. For instance, well, in Italy, well, it depends. You improvise. That's the way it often happens. Well, in France, what do? Well, we very often start our speeches with very long, very formal introductions with a lot of thanks to everyone. So, well, the question is to me, since I was born in France, from a family of Italian origins, since I have a son who is a Franco-American, and because I've worked in several countries, my question was, how should I start this speech this morning? Well, my answer was, let's combine a little bit of everything. So first, I would like to apologize for my French accent. and also in case I'm doing some mistakes in English. And you know what? I have to be very careful because my son is out there somewhere in the room and he could tease me if I do some mistakes when I speak. So please don't tell him if it is the case. More seriously, I take this opportunity to address a particular request to all of you in this audience who are native English speakers. Because as you may know, as you may realize, this is a very important competitive advantage. Well, this is a business world, isn't it? So it's a very important competitive advantage, especially in an international context like this one. And I can tell you that many speakers who are going to present their papers in the workshops during these 2 days are very, very nervous about presenting in English. So my request is, please be open-minded, be very tolerant for the various situations that we are going to encounter during the 2 days. It's so important to be aware of it and to be aware of this language barrier. So that's my request for the morning for everyone. Just imagine yourself in the opposite situation. Usually it helps, okay? So please. I want, of course, to thank many people, not only because it is formal speech to introduce and to present the conference, but also because it's sincere. And I just would like to emphasize a few things that are already been done this morning and maybe to add other aspects regarding the audience. So first, of course, I would like to thank and to mention the 2 universities that supported and organized the event. Georgetown University, here represented by 2 respectable deans. Thank you very much, Norberto and Luc, for being here. And especially the CIED, represented by head Chantal Santelices. Thank you so much, Chantal, for everything, for your support and for everything that makes this conference possible. Thank you so much for you and your team at CIED. It was really wonderful. I want to thank the University of Versailles, here represented by 2 distinguished leaders. Thank you very much, Benoit and Gilles, for being here. And thank you all in the room, in the audience from the University of Versailles. I think that, as you said, the cooperation between the 2 universities is something very important to us, and I'm so pleased that we can represent it today. I want to thank the Embassy of France, and thank you so much, Dr. Pham, for being here this morning. As a symbol, it's also extremely important, and I really appreciate what you said about also future cooperation. And so I'm sure that we have a lot to do together in the future. It was a real pleasure to meet with you. I want to thank and to welcome the international audience that we have today and that we will have during the 2 days. Can you believe that when you count all the situations, I mean the abstracts that we received as submissions, the scientific committee, whose members are very international, the audience and the people who are here today and who will be here tomorrow as well, can you imagine that the total of represented countries is 29? This is so impressive. I can't even believe it, so that's wonderful. You can look at the map here. We have a quick representation of the countries that are represented. And if you do not see yours, please let us know. We will add it on with a color particular on the map. So this is something so important, and it's thanks to all of you. And I just would like to emphasize this international representation. I want to warmly mention the scientific committee. You have the list on the documents. They did a great job for preparing this conference, and especially when they had to evaluate the submissions of papers that we received. By the way, we received 95 submissions. That was great, coming from all over the world. And it was very hard to select, and we selected less than 60, but it was very hard, especially because in an international context like this one, you may consider various criteria for the selection. So thank you so much to the scientific committee for their great job about it. Also, thank you to those who accepted to be chairs for the workshops. So we will have 19 workshops during the 2 days, and for those who will be part of the panels, and especially the business leaders and leaders of institutions that we will have for the two panels, the two roundtables during the days. We have an incredible representation of highly qualified people for the 2 days. That's something very, very impressive too. Thanks to also to the academic and professional networks that supported the event. You can find their logos either on the posters or on the documents. So they were a great support as well for this conference. I also want to mention the publishers that were part of the conference, and that will be also part of the following steps after the conference. You will see some exhibits in the hallway. I want to mention Professor Brasseur for the journal RIM, and Dr. Lara for the journal RFAP, and also the Palgrave Macmillan with a representative who is here in the hallway. So all those publishers are also part of the stakeholders of the conference. And last but not least, I want first, of course, to thank my dear co-chairs because we have shared so many moments since the beginning of the preparation. So Professor José Luis Guerrero, Professor Philippe Hermel, we have worked a lot for this conference. It's such a pleasure to have all you here today. So I want to thank them very much for being together in this incredible adventure. And I also want to mention the organizing committee. I mean, we could not be here without them, so we have to think about them because they did an incredible job as well. You have their names on the last page of your program. So let me tell you a little bit more about the logistics of our event now. So as you can see in the program that you have in your bags, we are in plenary this morning and tomorrow afternoon at the same place. The rest of the time we will divide into workshops whose rooms are indicated also in the program and will be indicated in front of each door. You have all the proceedings of the papers in the US key drive that you have with your registration documents. Coffee breaks will be in the lobby. That's very important to know. And lunches will be at the faculty club. There will be 2 large rooms for the faculty club. It's a restaurant just around the corner in the hallway. And there is no assigned table, so in case you do not find a seat in the first room, please go to the second one. You will be able to have a seat. And those who have registered or are invited to dinner tonight, you will be able to go there by bus if you wish to. The bus will leave from the lobby of the hotel at 7 p.m. Of course, you can go there by yourself. The dinner is at 7:30. You have the address in the documents, and also if it doesn't rain tonight, it's a nice walk to go there. It's just along the river, the Potomac, so it's very, very nice place to walk to. And if you have any question, any doubt, please contact the staff. They have a green badge, they have a blue lanyard, and I'm sure that they will be able to answer your questions. So regarding the content of the conference, we had very nice inputs already this morning. I just would like to add that the topic of responsibility in organizations will be approached from multiple points of view. It was already mentioned, but I just would like to emphasize a few of those points of view. We will have, of course, managerial point of view, but also economic, also social, ecological, legal, ethical, political, and well, as a broader view, also societal as a whole. So, and many other aspects that I didn't mention. But as it was said, it's really a very cross-cultural, cross-disciplinary topic, and we hope that we will have a lot of interesting discussions about it. So it's an intense and hopefully exciting program that we propose to you during those 2 days. And for this, we can be inspired by well, a quote or an idea, a main principle from the philosopher Nietzsche, who said that the responsibility is a privilege of human beings, and it's related to their ability to promise, to engage. And so I can promise that we are going to do our best in order to have very interesting discussions and interesting presentations during this event. So that's something that we also have to keep in mind. So now it's time to give the floor to Professor Hermel, who is going to introduce our distinguished guest, Professor Andrew Pettigrew, for the keynote lecture. And I hope that you didn't find that my introduction was too French, meaning too long, and I thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
So hello everybody. I'm very glad to be with you here in DC and especially at Georgetown University. Dear honorable scholars, dear colleagues, dear friends, as you may know, some of you, I'm not Asian, I'm not Italian, I'm not Corsican. I was just born in France. And however, as opposed to what I said just before about the very long French introduction and formal ones, I'm going to try to be very brief. So I'm so delighted and honored to introduce Professor Andrew Pettigrew. But even before doing so, I would like to thank him very sincerely for having immediately answered and accepted to be our very special distinguished speaker for our international conference. I remember very well when he was invited to the University of Versailles as a visiting professor, and he was at the same time at INSEAD as well. And it was such a great moment. Very valuable. Thank you for that as well, Andrew. I have known now Andrew for more than 15 years. And this is always a very good moment for me, especially. Given his reputation, and I mean especially his global reputation of Andrew, it may seem unnecessary to introduce him. But some of us, however, consider that it could be important to remind and to recall some key elements of his career and references and works. Andrew Pettigrew was and is now Emeritus Professor of Strategy and Organization at the CIED Business School in the prestigious Oxford University. And he is now Professor of Strategy and Organization at the School of Business, Economics and Informatics at Birkbeck College at the University of London. He received yesterday, about 1970, his doctorate from the University of Manchester. His research has pioneered the use of contextual and processual analysis of strategy, decision-making, change, and power. He has been awarded many times, many distinctions as a scholar, including Fellow of British Academy and Distinguished Scholar of the US Academy of Management, where he is still the only non-North American to be awarded this distinction. He has been awarded honorary doctorates from the University of Linköping, Sweden, from Copenhagen Business School, from the University of Liverpool, and from University of Liège. His latest research is on the study of system-wide change and the institutional development of business schools. He was awarded an OBE, Officer of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, by the Queen of his Service for Higher Education. So, dear colleagues, join me for welcoming our friends and colleagues, Professor Andrew Pettigrew. Thank you again. Thank you.
Thanks for you. It's always embarrassing to get up and talk after an introduction like that. I mean, where do you start? And but anyway, I'm delighted to be here. This is, because I've been to Washington many times, but this is the first time I've been to Georgetown University, which is clearly an awful thing to have to admit at my age. But here I finally made it, so I have to thank the conference organizers for allowing me the possibility to come to this university. And you probably, many of you won't remember this, but in 1969 there was a great event in November 1969, a great event in Washington, which I've subsequently got enormous credibility in my family for. I've got 3 sons, and when they look at these black and white television images of Washington in November 1969, what do you see? You see the first big anti-war demonstration taking place in Washington. There had been others in other parts of the United States, but this was the first one in Washington. So there we are. I can say I was there. Of course, I wasn't dressed like a hippie, and here I am all these years later, and I'm still not dressed like a hippie. But nevertheless, that was my first exposure to Washington. It was a great thing to have been to. But today's theme, it's obviously of huge scholarly and policy interest. And I'm going to concentrate rather more maybe on the scholarly dimensions of it in trying to frame a research agenda. But I think the policy interests are huge. And to me, the best kind of social science research is the research which it deals with a double hurdle. The double hurdle being, how can you do the work of the highest possible scholarly quality and have a policy and practice impact with that work? I call it double hurdle research. And this is a classic area in which to do such double hurdle research. So I want to talk a little bit and develop that theme amongst 1 or 2 others. And but of course, I have the particular status of being the end of the beginning of this conference, if I can put it like that. In that sense, this is since I'm British, I have to get a bit of irony in quickly, you know. So I've managed. That's my feeble attempt at an early, but you'll hear other irony as I develop my theme. So this is the end of the beginning, but I'm not going to take too long. I've only got 30 minutes, 35 minutes, and I'll try to stick to it. And I will also, I've got 3 main points to make. And so let me start by getting my conclusions in first. It's always a good thing to do at a presentation. Get your conclusions in first. So what are my conclusions? Whoops. That's it. What are my conclusions? The first one is about the need to frame the research agenda here in highly inclusive terms. This is clearly a multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary topic, and you can see that's represented in the title. The title of my talk, where I refer to business and society relationships, rather than the narrower, perhaps, domain of responsibility. So I've chosen to frame the research in terms of business and society relationships. I think responsibility is still a crucial issue in this domain, but it needs to be complemented by other, in my view, equally important areas of scholarly interest. And in a moment, I'll develop those other areas. My second conclusion is the need to approach business and society relationships in context, indeed in what is a dramatically changing context. So I want to address the impact of globalization on driving changes in the modern corporation. It seems to me that the global firm has been referred to as the ruthless corporation. It's also been described as a ruthless cosmopolitan. In terms of its spread of influence and impact. And I think clearly now one can see that globalization and its consequences are beginning to have a challenge on the liberal democratic ethos of many Western societies. And you could see that in the last election in this country, where globalization and its effect was a major point of attack in the political sphere. The same thing is happening in Europe, where people are looking at globalization, not just now as its benefits, but looking at some of its negative consequences in society. So I think we have to deal with the issue of globalization if we're addressing issues of change and if we're addressing issues of business and society. And it's business and society, of course, and politics. Because this issue is spreading now from the concern of business people to a concern with those who have been looking at the social response to business, now into politics. And politicians have picked it up and are using it to achieve some of their ends. The third theme is the need to study the changing contours of business-society relationships over time. And this is where I bring in the historical perspective and the historical method, both to contextualize what is going on and to appreciate the temporal development of business and society relationships. In doing this, I shall not just be arguing that history is about the past, of course. I'll be acknowledging the obvious fact that the past is very much alive in the present and is shaping the emerging future. So history is important, much more important, because it deals not just with the past, but it's because of its significant connections with the present and the future. That's why we need to bring historical analysis into this kind of thinking. So I think if we want to, therefore I'm arguing, if we want to develop both a scholarly, sound scholarly development here and a sphere of research which has a policy impact, we need to approach it inclusively. We need to approach it contextually and dynamically. So those are my three main conclusions. So I can go now, if you like, and I've articulated where I'm going, but let me try and justify those conclusions now in a few observations, try and deepen the argument of it a little bit. So the first theme is business and society. I think is a more fruitful and inclusive intellectual term, or flag to fly under, if you like, than the more familiar language of responsibility, or indeed of corporate social responsibility. But why challenge corporate social responsibility? Why challenge CSR? Well, for some it's a rallying cry, of course. It's a value crusade. I mean, some of the first scholars I met researching this area, they were on a value crusade. They weren't just out there to look at what was going on in society. They thought, I want to fix this. I don't like this. You know, it was a value crusade. And of course, this is good because it mobilizes the issue up the agenda. But it also has some unfortunate side effects. Such value crusades, of course, lead to major criticisms of people. People thinking, well, can their knowledge be really trusted if they're so much caught up in this value crusade? And of course, this was picked up by The Economist, the special issue of The Economist in 2005 on corporate social responsibility. They famously dismissed CSR as completely stupid rhetoric. So that was the way they dismissed it. Now you might think, well, this is a slander. And of course, it made the skeptics and cynics happy. It, of course, infuriated those who were on a value crusade. And I think CSR, of course, has developed somewhat since then, but it's also acquired a legacy of partiality, of value contamination, and of exclusivity. And I don't think those are healthy features to have in a research domain. Meanwhile, of course, a host of other titles or flags have appeared since 2005 in corporate social performance, business ethics, stakeholder management, corporate citizenship, sustainability. So there's now a plethora, a proliferation of language, often led by different tribal groupings. And in this context, I think it's been difficult to build a really robust research field. So CSR remains a contested terrain, and that's okay. if people are contesting things, they're still thinking. And that's above all what we want in our business. We want people to continue to think. So, but nevertheless, the questioning has gone on. And I think it means that, I think I've already summarized why. I suppose CSR is imprecisely, and of course, I missed a point there. The other key question linked to CSR has been, is there any evidence that if corporations invest in CSR, it will have some impact on their financial performance? So are soulful companies also companies who perform financially much better in the market? And this, of course, has produced a whole contested series of studies with no clear conclusion. And so why does this contestability occur there? Well, it's contested partly because CSR has been, the variable itself has been imprecisely defined. Secondly, it's been poorly operationalized and measured in many of the studies. The firm performance variable, the dependent variable, has also been variously defined, and many of the studies don't have control variables in the research either. So you have a combination of factors there which has led to inconsistent results. And that doesn't help us as social scientists when we can't produce consistent findings, even given the peculiar and particular quality of social science investigation as compared with investigation in other sciences. So, yet in all of this, you know, the strategically engaged corporation remains a crucial issue in the world of practice. And the engagement has to be more than just in business and economics. It has to stretch into the social, into the political, into the ethical, and of course into the legal. So we need this field, even though we haven't been able to establish it, I would argue, that well so far. So what are the virtues then of this more inclusive term, which I'm arguing for about business and society relationships? Well, I think the first is that compared with corporate citizenship and corporate social responsibility, it is a more value-neutral term. And I suggest this is a help in building a research base. Secondly, it's more inclusive in that it helps to capture a much broader domain of practice and of activity than does the word responsibility. And I'm going to mention what those key words are in a moment. I'm going to talk about the power of the modern corporation, which is practically absent in much of the literature. I'm going to talk about the legitimacy of the modern corporation, which again is implicit often, but often not studied as such. Of course, the R word, responsibility, is important. I think that should still be part of the agenda. The responsibility dimension, and of course, the other two are the governance and the regulation of the modern corporation. So this is my way of approaching this phenomenon more inclusively. And of course also to look at the interconnections between these five elements. And I'll give you some examples of that in a moment when I get into a bit further into the talk. So the R word, I'm not excluding the R word, I'm just saying how about approaching this from a broader perspective and including these other issues, which you'll see in a moment, I'm going to argue, are really very important indeed. And of course, to do this in the context of globalization and the existence of this ruthless cosmopolitan, which is the term that people are often using to describe the globalizing firm. So I can't get into all five of these domains today. It's completely impossible to do that. So I'm going to concentrate on the first one, power. The power of the modern corporation and its consequences for others, and why we need to study this as a crucial area of research. Seems to me acquiring and using power is one of the central engines of human existence. You can do nothing if you don't have power. You can stop a lot of things from happening, of course, if you have power. So power in that sense is a great positive energizer. It also has huge potential as a blocker of change. And we can see this as a blocker of change all over life. We've seen this all over the place. So, but we also know that acquiring power is an entirely different matter from holding on to power. Go and ask David Cameron or Theresa May. They'll tell you all about that. So the misuse of power by corporations can bring about legitimacy challenges, of course, which bring about loss of reputation and therefore a loss of market power. Just think of BP and the Gulf of Mexico disaster, and before that even, the major loss of life which took place at the Texas oil refinery, also owned by BP. So their behavior there, which is much to do with too much of a focus on short-term performance and not enough on the long-term value chain and operation of the business, leading to these huge reputational damage, which led to huge, of course, financial damage for them. Indeed, President Obama, even getting at us, even BP had stopped calling themselves British Petroleum about 20 years ago, but he managed to bring it out of the cupboard, and BP suddenly became known again as British Petroleum in the middle of the criticism of the company, which I think were entirely justified, I might add. So power is a hugely important thing. I think it's also, in the social sciences, I think it's more of a significant term, I would say, in European scholarship than it is in North American scholarship. And I've worked in a number of places in the United States and well familiar with the literature. There seems to be a preference over here for the much softer term of influence. Europeans are quite happy to use power in this area. And I think that's, to me, that's a positive feature as well. So there is this, there are many contradictions about power and its use, but senior executives are constantly taking actions which have powerful consequences, even senior executives of universities. So in common parlance, we think of firms as having market power, financial power, and even socio-political power in some spheres. And so when the CEO of Exxon or BP or Shell go off to China or Nigeria or Russia, as they do all the time, they get wheeled in front of the president. There are not many chief executives who go to those countries and get wheeled out in front of the president. They do. And of course, at the moment, the Secretary of State of the United States, as you know, is a former president of Exxon. So in the context of globalization, to return to that theme, who challenges the power of the ruthless, I'm saying ruthless, not ruthless, the ruthless corporation? Who is challenging the power of the ruthless corporation? Who, with their far-flung value chains, their decentralized governance, their internationally dispersed manufacturing all over the world, and their constantly churning cadre of executives. You know, the average tenure in office of a chief executive now throughout the world is about 4 years. It used to be 12 or 15. In those days, of course, people used to complain about chief executives becoming stale in the saddle. Now they're complaining about they're constantly cycling through the post, which, of course, just creates further instability. A good example, by the way, of a ruthless cosmopolitan is the Tommy Hilfiger group before they went private in 2006. Before then, they had their corporate headquarters in Hong Kong. Their legal incorporation was in the British Virgin Islands. Their shares were in the New York Stock Exchange. Their annual general meeting was in Bermuda, and their manufacturing was in Mexico and Asia. Now that's a ruthless corporation. And that's being done for a purpose. That's not just because the folks like to travel around the world and go to nice places. That's being done for all kinds of reasons related to tax avoidance and all sorts of other things. And to maintaining autonomy and control over their own world. And people can't pin them down. If you're distributed in that way, it's hard to pin them down. So you've got, by definition, potentially at least more power. Of course, you can also see the power of the big data companies, Amazon, Facebook, Google, Apple, Microsoft. At the moment, national states seem impotent to deal with the power of these companies, especially in relation to matters of terrorist-inspired data on the internet. Everybody's squeezing Facebook about this, but they're not getting very far. And of course, Facebook have got a defense, but they're not getting very far. So where does power lie in exchanges across international boundaries? Where does it lie? Some have suggested, I think Jerry Davis, some of the best writing in this area, by the way, has been done by Jerry Davis, who is a professor at the University of Michigan, a host of absolutely fantastic papers he's written on this subject. And he suggested that, that the EU has potential power to have an impact on products and environmental regulation, and it is intervening in those areas. The US, of course, has expressed its biggest power in the sphere of corruption and tax avoidance. And you have to look at what happened to Siemens, the big German global company, and of course many of the international banks who were at the center of scandals there. So the US government's doing its business here, which I think is absolutely right, intervening in issues to do with scandal and corruption. That's what they should be doing. And of course the international NGOs are operating in the areas of human rights and of labor law, again, with benefits. But there are actually few studies of this phenomenon so far. It must be a wide-opening agenda. I mean, another dimension, of course, of all this is the activities of global firms in their relationships directly with states, particularly, you might argue, of some of the failing states in our world, and I won't mention any of them, but I think you know who they are, or some of the weak states in our world. Again, I won't mention them, but you know who you are, and of course some of the repressive states. Again, I won't mention them, but you know who they are. There is, I think some have argued there is a political role for the business corporation that goes way beyond mere compliance with legal standards or conformity with moral expectations. There is a political role. Now, this is a controversial thing to say for many people. Many businessmen would say, politics. I'm not in politics. I'm in business, you know. But the reality actually is that they can't keep out of politics. If you're operating in a failing state or a repressive state, or a state which totally disregards the moral rights of your employees who happen to be working in that country, you clearly have, you might argue, a responsibility to intervene. So, I think we need to understand how, where, when, and why the standards which are now being created are actually being defined. And who has the power to uphold those standards in business and society relationship? And what is the price of a loss of legitimacy or a price of a loss of reputation for non-compliance? So you can see here, and again I can't develop this theme too much further, that the phenomena, the five phenomena, if you like, there that I'm trying to address are highly interconnected. You can't address issues of power unless you address issues of legitimacy. If there's been a misuse of power, there will be questions about legitimacy and also responsibility. There will also be expectations that somebody will begin to regulate this phenomenon. And there'll be an expectation that within these corporations, it's time they got their act together in terms of matters of governance. So these things are highly interconnected, and therefore they should be studied. They should be studied in an inclusive way, rather than just picking a single dimension of the issue and trying to abstract from it something of consequence. At least that's what I'm recommending here. And of course, finally, my last comment on globalization, of course, is that you're beginning to see that large firms are engaging in previously state-defined activities. If you go to some countries in the world, you'll see these global firms, they are getting involved in issues of public health. They're getting involved in issues of education. They're getting involved in issues of social security, and they're getting involved in issues of human rights. We need to understand why this is happening and with what consequence. So these are crucial things. And the final thing, I have mentioned the famous five, you know, the world's 5 most valuable listed companies. They are Facebook, Google, Amazon, Apple, and Microsoft. Their activities have been hugely beneficial if you talk to anybody in Britain, I think the same thing would happen in the United States. Amazon's reputation is extremely high, very positive. People see this company, they're providing a service which is unimaginable before, you know, the speed of it and the efficiency of it. And actually, if you test it by saying, well, actually, I didn't get my book and my parcel, there's somebody there who will come back to you and say, yeah, that's right, how can I fix it for you? So these are, Amazon especially, could be gouging consumers. I think most people in Britain and the United States don't feel that Amazon are gouging consumers. They may feel, however, that they are their employment practices in the large warehouses and distribution centres are not what they should be, and they have been attacked by trade unions in Britain for precisely that. But who's going to control? Who's got control of the data in our kind of world? Well, Google see what we search for. Facebook see what we share. Amazon know what we buy. And some people would argue that we need to reboot regulation and antitrust in the information age to deal with these kind of questions. Well, I think I should move on. I think that was enough of globalization and its impact, and particularly the power dimensions of it. But I think these are crucial issues to study. I mean, these are the big things that matter in life today, and that's what we should be studying. Big issues where have huge scholarly importance, but have huge policy and practice impact. Doing double hurdle research, as I call it, is where we should be, but of course it's very demanding to be there. That kind of work couldn't possibly be done by individuals. It can be done, but usually that scale of work probably requires the building of teams of scholars, something which happens, of course, all the time in the natural sciences. Teams there is you know, big teams, big themes, big teams is the natural science way of doing things. So that has tended not to be the way we do things in the social sciences. There is a justification now for us becoming more team-oriented in our work to tackle these kind of holistic problems which are of huge societal interest. Well, let me finish by expressing some of the virtues of the historical perspective, because I think history actually can help us. And I don't know if there are any historians. Anybody dare to admit they're a historian in the room here? Have we got any historians? It's okay. It's respectable to be a historian. In my terms, it's very respectable. But let's have a look at history for a moment, where of course we're not just dealing with history. We're dealing with time. That's the big, and we're dealing with dynamics of the relationship between business and society. Of course, there are many stereotypes about history as an intellectual domain. First, of course, most people assume history has a huge subjective quality. You can't trust it because it's subjective. So people say, well, there is the past, and then there is history. And history is someone's interpretation of the past, of course, hence its subjective quality. So that's the first put down that historians have to tolerate. The second one is that, of course, historians are assumed to be inveterate empiricists. This comes after that, then this comes after that. So historians are essentially empiricists who lay out the sequence of events over time. This, of course, if you're a proper social scientist, that's not pucker. We do more than that. We've got theories, we've got concepts, we've got fancy methodologies. We don't just tell stories. So historians are said to be obsessed with setting the record straight, telling the story as it is. And the implications of this, of course, is that historians are atheoretical empiricists. But the ultimate slander, and this is terrible British irony, but the ultimate slander, of course, an insult, is by a well-known sociologist called McCrae, who argued that sociology is history with the hard facts left out, and history is sociology with the brains left out. You know, so that's McRae's put down. You know, and don't believe a word of it. Don't believe a word of it. But all of this, of course, has an element of grain of truth in it. You know, I know my youngest son is a fantastic historian, from my point of view, and he and I talk about this a lot. But anyway, that's a family matter. But I'm certainly arguing here for the virtues of history, and I think I've made that point very clear. So, what are the particular virtues? Well, the first one is, of course, historians appreciate and help us to avoid the spurious labeling of some phenomenon as new. I mean, you read the literature on corporate social responsibility in the last 30 or 40 years, and you think it was invented by management theorists and researchers in the 70s and 80s. Occasionally, you'll get somebody going and say, well, actually, of course, this thing was around in the time of the Industrial Revolution, you know, that corporations then got concerned with their employees' welfare and the round. They didn't have anywhere to live, for one thing, near where the factories were, so we better build them housing. We better look after their health, because they're not going to be very good, effective workers if they're being killed in the manufacturing process, or if they're being gassed by the materials that are being used at that time, or they have to nowhere comfortable to live. So there's plenty of evidence about for issues of corporate social responsibility way back into the 19th century. And even if you go back, my youngest son, again, historian, he's studying at the moment the emergence of the great English trading companies. Of course, one of which is the Virginia Company, was here. You know, not one of the biggest. The biggest one, was, of course, was the East India Company, and the East India Company was well into issues of dealing with social responsibility, and this was in the early 17th century. The East India Company it was born in 1600 and died in 1867, and of course it had lots of enemies because it was a monopoly, because they didn't always deal with issues in the right kind of manner in all the societies they were in, actually. And of course, but they had huge power. The East India Company at its prime, they were generating more revenues than the whole of the state of England at that time. They had an army of 250,000 people who were doing all sorts of things to try and uphold the power of the company. So this isn't new. Come on, you know. This isn't something which has occurred since the 1960s and 70s and 80s. These issues have been going on ever since there have been large organizations of any sort engaging with society. So that's the first virtue of history. It reminds us that not everything which is claimed to be new is new. The second is, of course, is that the domain of inquiry of history takes us into phenomena which can only be understood in the long term. And I think the issues we're dealing with here are about long-term development. Thirdly, of course, the time issue, to take history seriously is to take time seriously. Historians can go beyond pattern recognition of what is going on, which is crucial. I mean, many of us are in the business of identifying patterns in what is happening, but we also need to know about patterns about how things are happening. The what isn't enough in our business. We need to be able to understand the how and the why, of course, and historians are very much concerned with how and when things happen in order to explain why something is happening. So these are crucial dimensions of concern for the historian, which also have a really significant impact on our appreciation and understanding of business and society relationships. It's now 10:45, I think. It's time I stopped. to keep the program on time. It's time. You must all be desperate for a cup of coffee by now. So I hope that I've stimulated some thought there. I hope that I haven't been too challenging. If I have been challenging, but maybe not. I think it's good to be challenging. And I hope that we can have a chance to have a chat over a cup of coffee, over lunch or dinner this evening, and we can take some of these issues forward, because this is a very cursory glance at something which is far too important to just spend half an hour on. But since I'm a very polite chap, it is now 10:45 and it's time I shut up. So thank you very much.
So this is a roundtable about responsible organization, of course, and this is my pleasure as well to be moderator of this table. I have the pleasure to have some people I know very well for a long time, for some of them, and only one, maybe a little bit, a few days. So, as you can see, we try not to have the parity, but one representative of each gender, and a very qualitative woman for representing each gender. So we'll see. So, of course, even if this is an alphabetical order, I would like to present to you Wathieu. Wathieu is, as you can see, the CEO and co-founder of Chesapeake Bay Condo. You will see that it's a fabulous adventure, she will tell you. And of course, on my left, you have Tyrone, Ingram, senior sales managers at Sheraton. You have on the extreme side Michel Perez, Associate Director of LAREQUOI, and of course, our kind of old friends, Walter Rowen, and he is President of Susquehanna Glass Company. We have a kind of diversity because this is a big company, so representative of a big company. This is a medium-sized, but she will explain to you, but a big medium-sized company, international as well, as a big one. We have a very medium-sized, but much more little size than the other one. And we have a kind of outsider, very hard duties he has because he has to represent the finance area. He is specialist of this transversal topic. And we'll try together to address and to understand what could be really a responsible organization. We'll do that in two parts. First one, it will be at the macro level. It means that really for the entire organization. What does it mean? In their organization especially. And the second part will be at the micro level. I mean that at individual level, as leader, as managers, how they can assume, how they can develop, how they can consider being responsible and maybe accountable in one way. This is a program, but finally, before having a kind of very quick conclusion from them, we'll have some questions from the room as well, if possible. All right? So let's start, and maybe we can ask May to present a little bit her organization, and especially what kind of characteristics, specificities, and challenges she has with her business, in how in this situation and this context she could consider that responsibility as meaning for her. So, May.
Thank you, Philippe. Thank you for inviting me and share the podiums with very diverse and interesting background experts. First of all, I love the topic of social responsibility because in this day of age, as social media become increasingly scrutinizing consumer and businesses, there's no better time to talk about that. But before that, most of you probably have heard about the name Chesapeake Bay. I don't know if all of you or some of you have actually buy one of my product, which is called Chesapeake Bay Candle. So we are a leading designer and manufacturer and distributor of home fragrance product mainly. And we have, for that reason, a design center and distribution and manufacturing in Asia, in Vietnam, and also recently in Glen Burnie, Maryland. So we're proud to say that we have products now majority made in USA. As a consumer product company, we do have a lot of responsibilities as our product for the last 20 years really reach over 300 million families. Globally and obviously in the US in general, we work with most of the major retailers around the country and in some of the foreign countries. As a product that people like, people, as you know, like to decorate with candles, not only for special occasions, but increasingly because the fragrances, the lavenders, the pumpkin pies make them feel happy and relaxed. And it creates an ambiance for their home that is nothing but their own. While it's a delightful product, what goes into a candle has increasingly become very restrictive because of the chemicals and ingredients in those candles. So as a company, we have many choices to really make about how to bring the best to the consumers. There's a whole supply chain that involves glass manufacturers, involve fragrance manufacturers, and Philippe would be happy to know that out of my top vendors for fragrance, 2 are actually France-based, and they have US manufacturing. On top of that, there are also wax. As you know, traditionally, candles are made of petroleum wax. Our company made the choice to start incorporating more than 50% soy wax, which is very clean. It's also much less damaging when you burn a candle for the environment. It is a challenge because the properties of soy wax is very different when you mix them with fragrances. Traditionally, factories of fragrance are used to working with wax made from petroleum than wax made from soy wax. The way that it optimizes fragrances when it's burning takes a long time. So it becomes more expensive for a company like us to reformulate all the product. But in the end, the lesson learned is that when we put the soy wax blend into the market, we increase the cost to the retailers, and they in turn has to increase the cost to consumers. And the amazing thing is consumers today have become so aware and educated about the product they want and how they want it that they actually are willing to pay the prices. So being socially responsible is not only a conscious thing to do, it actually is good for your bottom line. And that's my theme to those of you, that being good is not only making you feel good, it actually helps your business. As a company, we also are very aware that 90% of our consumers are women. And in this country, 80% of consumer decisions are made by women. So how do we really get to understand our consumers who these days really own a brand? A brand can die and thrive because of consumers. So from day one, we decided that we need to not only hire women. It's a natural that women like to work in a candle company. We have more than 80% of women work in our workforce in the factories and more than 60% in our offices in design and distribution. But we also very consciously select women and groom them to be leaders. When they are leaders, they make good and conscious decisions that not only help build better product, which serve the end user, but they make decisions so that they're more responsible. As we know, women tend to care about the impact the environment have when you make a product that use a lot of packaging. They care about what it means to not have good ingredients that pollute the air. So all these decisions that we consciously make about hiring, about selecting vendors that are socially responsible, have really paid off. I think we are one of the most innovative companies because we have such a workforce that are passionate about what they do and are rewarded for the job that they have done. So one last thing is I am an immigrant from China. I was trained as a diplomat. I would never imagine in my lifetime that I would make candles for the rest of my life. So this is another way to say that this country has given me an opportunity to be a women leader. I'm not sure it's going to be easy moving forward. There's such a debate about globalism and a debate about whether we should close our borders and add border taxes. And I want to make sure that you understand, a lot of you come from all over the world also to receive education. We build a great country not because we are closing our doors. We build a country because, and the name of the conference also is called In a Global Environment. We build this country because we attract all the talent and the passionate people like myself. The entrepreneurs and the immigrants are self-select group of people who take risks, who really have a passion, and they go the extra miles. So that's the responsibility of all the businesses to ensure that globalism is moving forward, and we provide the continuous opportunity for strengthening the talents and growing the talents in this country.
Thank you very much. Could you remind us how many people now you are in your companies, and how many different nationalities maybe you have? Very briefly. I will take this one.
Oh, okay.
No,
so we don't, okay. Thank you for asking this question. I was actually going to talk about it. So as an immigrant, I was invited to the White House in 2020 to talk about 2012 with Mr. Obama and Mr. Biden to talk about bringing jobs back to the United States. So I'm very proud to say, as an immigrant, we're not really taking jobs away from this country. I have brought back over 150 jobs. And we also employ over another 1,000 around the world, not to mention the supply chain that has an impact because of our purchasing in this country, from wax suppliers to fragrance suppliers and glass manufacturers, label manufacturers, packaging manufacturers. So we're very happy to say that it's a very good thing that immigrants can also create jobs, and women can create jobs too.
Thank you for that. Hello? Hello? Yeah. Thank you for this first presentation. So let's get back maybe to the big one. And we'll get back to the middle and little companies. So usually people in academics especially are very focused on big companies. Sometimes it's considered as a model, but sometimes it's considered as these companies, especially during now the real globalization of everything. It means finance, but human resources as well. These companies are more or less responsible. So what does it mean for a group like Sheraton? And we'll see a little bit later what does it mean for you as managers. But what about Sheraton as big company?
Mr. Philippe, thank you, and thank you, audience in Georgetown, for inviting me to be here today. I am suffering a little bit from a cold, so this is my Barry White voice, if you don't mind. I work for Sheraton, which is now owned by Marriott, which just purchased Starwood. So in the larger complex, if you will, I work for, there's Marriott, there's Starwood, then there is the brand that I work for, which is Sheraton. Then amongst that complex is the owner of the brand, which is Marriott. Then the owner of the building is another company, but then the owner of the employees is whom I work for, which is the management company. It's very similar to most companies around America, which are franchised. So we are a franchise brand, if you will, of Marriott. I work for the management company in which I manage several salespeople, several admin assistants, executive assistants. My primary job is to make sure that we generate revenue for the hotel. So essentially where you're sitting today is what I do, my team does. Someone has to move the tables, set the tablecloths, put the food in. Someone has to do all the little things that we take for granted. So from my perspective, I manage those teams. And then from there, what I believe in as a social responsible organization is to make sure that we reach back and we touch one. So we have individuals within our environment that are not necessarily those individuals that are at the top of the heap, but they are people have great prospects. and they have great abilities, and they need someone along the way to reach back and touch them and bring them along the way. That, I think, is my responsibility well beyond bringing in the revenue, because I think human capital is the greatest, greatest, greatest asset that we have. You can speak responsible organizations, but if you don't have people that believe in it, there's no reason to be responsible. Our company makes sure that we're involved both within the hotel in terms of helping our employees understand their role, because ultimately you're our customer. Everyone that comes to a hotel is our customer. Also, the people who work in the hotel are our internal customers, so we have to treat them with respect. Without a customer, we don't have a business. There's no job, there's no home, we don't have those little luxuries. So we firmly believe that by reaching back and touching one and pulling them along and giving them the respect, giving them the promotions, recognizing them when they have done something good, recognizing them when there's a birthday, recognizing them when there's an anniversary, giving them the time off if there's bereavement that's necessary, because people do and their families do, in fact, go through changes in their life. So it's a firm belief, at least within our organization, that we take care of our internal customer, who then in turn takes care of our external customer. So it is that belief. We also are trying to be very responsible neighbors by making sure our land on the external is taken care of, the building is clean and painted, and all the little things, the grass is cut. On a weekly basis, we have a team of people that go out into the neighborhood, and there are several parks within the neighborhood that we go out and clean the parks, pick up the trash, pick up the little things that are in the neighborhood so that our neighborhood is clean. So we make sure that we do that. We also go out to the homeless shelters, and we make sure that there's food there. We make sure that there's beds there. They go to the fire station. I think there's a couple of people in the area that know where I'm speaking of. We make sure that within the organization, within the community, that we are a part of decisions that are made within our neighborhood. We believe that those little things, every little thing leads to something larger, and it helps us along the way. We believe that if you take care of the customer, there's going to be great customer service. With great customer service, great customers repeat, and that continues to exude itself in terms of additional business. People have, one of the things that I'm firmly aware of, the majority of the people that work in the hotel business are not managers. They are not salaried. The individuals that we pay attention to, the greatest, largest department in hotels is housekeeping. Many of them are immigrants from many parts of the world. Many of them don't make but $10, $11, $12 an hour. And many of them work 2, 3 jobs. You have servers that do the same thing. And when you take care of those guests, when I do what I do in terms of bringing guests like yourself into the hotel, that helps them with hours. That then in turn helps them pay their rent, take care of their babysitters, and do the little things that they need to do in life. So it's my job as a socially responsible manager is to make sure that we constantly work at continually taking care of our guests, both internal and external. It's extremely important. What are some of the challenges? Millennial travel and customer expectations are really changing the way that the hotel environment is. We want to make sure we keep the personnel turnover down. And the reason why you want to do that is because if you've been to a hotel today and you come back next year, we want the same people there because you have a certain level of expectation in terms of your services. So we in turn want to make sure that we have enough personnel and the proper personnel in place to take care of our guests. And that's not only within our property, but within the brand and across the board. There's training. There's all sorts of training that we do to make sure that those guests, in fact, are taken care of. International travel is extremely important to us. There are a lot of issues that are surrounding international travel today, but international travel from Canada, New York, and Mexico and European countries is extremely important. Those dollars help pay our bills, the taxes. So by taking care of our internal and external guests, those kinds of things continually occur. One of the other concerns that we have certainly is oversaturation of hotels. That certainly is a concern, because the more hotels you have to staff them somewhere. So you need personnel to take care of them. But again, my biggest concern is making sure that we have the proper personnel in place, that they're trained, that they take care of our guests, both internal and external. Those are our primary concerns.
Okay, thank you. Hello. Thank you for this first presentation. So now in one way and opposite side, this is a small companies, Walter will explain to you. Usually this kind of very small company, not so small, but we consider that these companies are not really managed because people do what they can and what they would like to do. And I can testify that in one way, because we had a case study on this case, that this is very well managed, and I will explain to you that this is maybe the leader in the East Coast in this business. So, and don't forget that usually this is true in Europe and in the United States as well. This is a small, little company who will create added value. So let's start about what is your company, what is maybe a little bit the history, because it's important in terms of transformation, and what about maybe this kind of company, and yours especially, take care of responsibility?
Well, let me say I'm just delighted to be here this morning. When the four of us first sat up here together, every one of us said that it was an honor and a thrill to be in front of all of you today. We live in a world, most of us, where every day we're working in our businesses and dealing with different issues that come up, daily issues, sometimes long-term issues, but we're involved in our business every day. For us to step back and be able to have the perspective of talking to you folks and hearing about the way in some ways, the very front end of the whole process, which is the educational process. That to me has been an incredible opportunity and challenge in dealing with Georgetown University and the professors in this organization. It's just been thrilling. To give you a kind of a brief history, my company is a very old company. It's a family-owned business. It was started in 1910 by my great uncle and my grandfather. So it's a three-generation company. Small is relative. We are located in a small town in Pennsylvania, Columbia, Pennsylvania, and we are located right on the Susquehanna River, so that's the reason for the name Susquehanna Glass Company. May and I are connected in that the Susquehanna River is the main tributary of the Chesapeake Bay. And we also are connected in the sense that we are both producing consumer products. My company is a glass decorating company. We do not manufacture the glass itself. We buy the glass from a vendor, and then we decorate it in many different ways. The primary products that we're decorating are things like wine glasses, lots of barware, and we're selling the product through retail outlets. We sell to most of the major retailers in the country today. A huge part of our business is coming now from the internet. We do a lot of personalization. So we have a factory in Columbia that's about 30,000 square feet. And we employ somewhere between 60 and 100 employees right now. It's three generations. It started in 1910. If you think about that, the company survived World War I, and my grandfather served in the United States Army in France. It survived the Great Depression. It survived World War II. And then it had a long period of flourishing and doing quite well in what we call the domestic handmade glass industry. So back in the 40s and the 50s, when our business was really doing quite well, we were designing glass products, wine glasses, barware. We were having those molds made and having small factories in mostly West Virginia and Western Pennsylvania manufacture the raw glass product for us. We'd bring it back to Columbia, we would decorate it, and then we were really so we were the design, the marketing, and the sales end of the domestic handmade glass industry. That's kind of the history of the company. The interesting thing is, and what I think Professor Philippe and his students have found interesting about our business, is that we have gone through so many different changes in those 3 generations. The domestic handmade glass industry essentially collapsed in the late 1960s, and it is effectively gone. There are virtually no, well, there's 1 or 2 small, very small, handmade glass factories left in the United States. And we had an enormous dilemma from a standpoint of where does the business go? Do we continue to stay as a decorator, domestic decorator in the United States, or when the industry collapsed, the reason it collapsed was because the European markets was at the time that the Soviet Union was starting to open up, and factories in Romania and Czechoslovakia and Poland were finally coming online, and the big customers that we had, the Macy's and the Jordan Marshes and the Woodward Lothrops, department stores of this world, were able to go over to Europe and buy directly from Europe. So the domestic companies that had been servicing that need, that product, were now suddenly, in a sense, out of business because we could not compete. So we had a dilemma. And this was back really in, I would say, the early 1960s through the 1980s. Did we, as a company, decide to go with the flow and become an import company and close our factory and simply go overseas and import product? At the time, we were probably employing maybe 30 or 40 people in our factory doing the decorating. And we could, at that moment in time, get the same product for a cheaper price and be potentially more competitive in our marketplace. Now, that was a huge decision for our company. And at the time, the decision we made was to stay as a domestic manufacturer, continue to keep our decorators working, but quite truthfully, for probably about 20 or 30 years, most people, most business people would have looked at that decision and said, that was a wrong decision. Because there were some other companies in the same position as we were that chose the opposite direction, meaning they went into importing. And for a period of time, they became much more successful than we were. 20 years later, they're out of business, by and large. And we continue to have a growing workforce in Pennsylvania. So our company is an interesting company to look at and to understand because of the different trends and cycles that we've been through and the way we've made decisions that have allowed us to survive that process. The last thing I would say, just in terms of explaining the company, is I said in the beginning, my company is a family-owned business. That is a financial fact. My family, I am the sole owner of the business. My grandfather owned the business. My mother owned the business. So it stayed in our family for 3 generations. But what I tell my managers all the time, and I tell my employees all the time, is that we are a family business in a financial way, but it's only one part of the concept of a family business. I have employees that have worked for me for 35 years. When you go into Columbia, it's a small town of about 12,000 people. I guarantee you that if you stop anybody on the street in Columbia, and if they've lived in Columbia all of their lives, more than likely somebody in their family has worked for us. I tell my employees every day, every time I have an opportunity to talk to them, I say, this business is our business. You're part of the family. We make decisions. We hire a lot of women in the company, just like May. And it's a very important decision for us because they're incredibly strong workers. They have a different perspective than men. We both have good perspectives, but the women's perspective is unbelievably important. And as May explained, when you're dealing with consumer products, 70–80% of our customers are women. So it's the smartest business decision I can make to have women in my business making those kinds of decisions with me. But if you think about it from an economic standpoint and from a family standpoint, women as full-time workers pose problems because a lot of my women have families. And what I will say to them is if your child is sick, you need to be home with your child, not in work. We will cover you when that's a problem. And it's those kinds of decisions that make my business a true family business in not just ownership alone.
Thank you so much. So we had 3 different examples of companies, and we have a guy, a side, a little bit. We will talk about this very important variable. This is finance. Finance is normally, for the business school, a very noble variable to integrate in the way of managing. But for now, maybe more than 10 years, this is noble, but also a very debating variables. So could you say, Michel, what's going on in finance now in the time of real globalization, and how could it be responsible in one way?
Well, thank you, Philippe. I'll try to do it in 9 minutes. But first, I want Annie to be proud of me, so I'm going to make 2 short introductions. The first, the American one, I'm very glad to be at Georgetown because my daughter was part of the Georgetown class of 2002. It tells you how old I am. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here. And the second one is going to be my European introductions, and I will not apologize for my accent, because 1, I think you understand me anyway, but 2, our diversity here is our richness. And Philippe, it's a great honor to be part of such a diverse audience. Now, since we have relatively limited time, there is one thing, I think, which characterizes the change in terms of how the financial industry accept or should accept responsibility is basically, but it's moved somewhat I would call conformity to compliance. This is a trend that you could follow for the last 30 or 40 years. Let's take perhaps a historical perspective. Finance, by definition, is an exchange of money. A couple of characteristics. International finance, by definition, works in different countries. By definition, it is interrelated, and this implies usually very large organizations, so we're very different from family businesses, if you want. Usually spread ownership, so you have many stakeholders, usually an organization in the financial industry, and a key point, it's a heavily regulated industry. But what characterizes also the banking industry or the financial industry in the last 30 or 40 years is that banks die. If they do mistakes, they are gone. Look what happened in 2008. If you go into the origins of compliance, you take the historical perspective, Professor Pettigrew went back to the 17th century. In fact, if you look at finance and business, the regulation started, some people say, with the Code of Hammurabi, that's 1750 before Christ. So, 3,000-4,000 years ago. It changed, in fact, with the new capitalism in the Anglo-Protestant approach, where you had, the shareholding companies. One key point from a legal standpoint is that the distinction between corporate and individual responsibility. I think this is something we will discuss a little bit later. If you take the case of the United States, there was a famous case which went all the way to the Supreme Court in 1909, so you see it goes back a number of years. It was the New York Central Railroad, and basically the Supreme Court decided that a corporation could be held responsible whilst, schematized, and its employees may not have been involved in personal liability. So this is a key point when you look at the industry. What happened also, if you take the broad approach, is this change from conformity to compliance, if you want. Started or became apparent with the fight against corruption, especially in the United States. So I would say this is a consequence of the scandals, Watergate, Enron. And what happened after those scandals? Well, you have the Foreign Corrupt Practice Act, 1977, Sarbanes-Oxley Act, 2002. So it's something which happened, roughly in the last 15, 20 years. What this trend is, I think, is a reaffirmation of traditional values, ethical. This is another key word. If you want to be a responsible corporation, and that's basically what the three of my fellow panelists, you have to have ethics. It implies a moral dimension. It's not only the bottom line that counts. And in fact, just to go to what you said, an ethical and moral corporation is good for business. There must be an alignment there. And there must be also an alignment with your social network. Now, the definition of compliance is something which is sometimes not well understood, especially if you come from a continental European jurisdiction system, legal system, because you're used to work on a system of codes and laws. In the old system, if you want, the corporation used a check-the-box approach. So, for instance, in banking, are you going to lend to Mr. X? Well, you had a scoreboard. He meets this criteria, that criteria. Yes, okay, I've done my job. I go home. And if there is a problem with the loan, well, I can tell my boss, hey, I followed the policy. Compliance is much more tricky because you still have those check-the-box requirements. But in addition to that, you have a whole approach about looking at the ethical, at the moral values. So it's much more difficult. And when in French, for instance, you translate compliance by conformité, I think you miss 50% of the meaning. Practically speaking,
just a word about that. Yeah. It's important in quality as well. It's the difference between conformity and relevancy in one way. Being relevant, it means that we have to check what is really the base of the business. Mm-hmm. But in one way, you have to decide if it's good for the different stakeholders as well. Mm-hmm. And you can't say only that, well, I've done my job, but the question is, was it relevant to do that, and so on. So this is the way you explain that now. Yeah. Compliance is it, right?
Yeah. But I think the key thing to keep in mind, and that's how the responsibility concept changes also, that in fact is a 360 approach. You know, it's not, you used to have pyramidal organization. Well, the guy who's in the middle, the manager, you know, who got a graduate from Georgetown or you know, Versailles or some natural university, he's going to start as an associate, an assistant vice president or whatever. His boss is going to tell him, you know, this is what you have to do. He does it well, you know, he gets promoted. Now it's not exactly like that. It's much more complicated because you take into consideration some ethical values, and for a manager, it becomes much more difficult to rate his or her subordinates because it's not only based on performance. It's based on a number of other criteria that we could discuss later. Perhaps to move on, let me tell you what, you know, again, very broadly, what would be the components of compliance. One, you must have a sound governance, transparency, and a set of internal and external controls. Again, the corporation is not by itself. The corporation works in a much global environment, and it had to meet, you know, different sets of criteria. You must have a written and encompassing code of ethical conduct, and in writing, you have to state that some infractions will be met with zero tolerance. In other words, what you have now in most banks is that, I don't know, take sexual harassment. If you have an instance of sexual harassment, the employee who's found guilty of this type of infraction loses his or her job immediately. Now, of course, you have to document it, and you must have a fair process to reach the decision. The other point is it's a risk-based system where you are going to allocate your resources based on where the risks are. In other words, if a company, if a bank is going to do more business in difficult countries, it will have to allocate more resources to check what's going on with those companies. And if, for instance, it does business with, say, LLCs in tax havens countries, well, this implies, you know, additional due diligence, and there are some pretty strenuous rules that they have to follow in this case. Compliance also requires training, in fact, not only for the employees and the officers, but also from the directors at the board level. Again, very broad type of approach. And finally, a key characteristic of compliance is that, I think, rejoins what our friends said earlier. The tone must come from the top. If your CEO makes a mistake, he or she should be out. You had a very interesting case in the case of Wells Fargo, you know, recently, although it took perhaps a little bit longer than what some people would have expected. And just to give you an idea of the amount and the risks, you know, that you incur if you fail in your compliance, you have obviously very harsh fines. I think there are a number of French friends here. They probably remember the fine of close to $8 billion, billion, 9 zeros for BNP Paribas. But this was not the highest one. The highest fine probably was Bank of America, 13 billion, 13 and 90. And this can go all the way to the loss of license. It happens with Arthur Andersen. It could be jail for the people who committed the offenses. For instance, recently, Madoff was found guilty and condemned to 150 years of prison. So we are talking a very, very hefty penalty. The other, you know, if you miss your compliance requirements, the other targets is obviously it's going to be bad for business. You have huge reputational risk, and basically you're going to be out of business very shortly. What's very interesting, you know, maybe we can go in more details later, is that you have seen the appearance of accelerated procedures what's called in the United States the deferred prosecution agreement, which basically means that when a bank has found to be guilty of some infractions, there is not necessarily a legal review. So, you know, when it takes, there was in Europe some cases with Total or Société Générale, which were in the courts for 10, 15 years, you know, with everybody dragging their feet, so not much was happening at the company. This now is being at least partly corrected by those more accelerated procedures. You have them in the United States, you have them in the UK, and you have them to a certain extent now in France with the new law Sapin 2. And I think you're going to see them in other European countries pretty soon. Now, just to conclude, I think the key question in the financial industry is what is the future of compliance? Are we tending towards a universal compliance paradigm? And you have different trends here. One is that I think there is a large need of qualified personnel. So at Georgetown University, if some of your graduates are looking for business opportunities once they got their diploma, I think the financial compliance industry you know, is looking for good qualified people, and I know you train them very well. So this could Versailles also. So I think there are some interesting opportunities here. Most of the countries, as we said, embrace compliance. You know, it started, you know, with the Foreign Corrupt Practice Act 1977 here, but you know, you had Sapin 2 and to a certain extent the law against corruption in France. But more curiously, more interestingly, I think we have some people from Brazil here? Okay. It's really extraordinary, and you should be very proud to be Brazilian after what happened in the case of Lava Jato Petrobras. It's something which is absolutely amazing. 6, 7 years ago, nobody would have thought that a major multinational like that would go under scrutiny. You know, 2 presidents, or at least, well, one was dismissed and under scrutiny. In fact, I think on all the presidents of the Republic because of corruption. I mean, this is amazing. You know, Brazil today is probably the most advanced legislation in terms of fight against corruption. Even in some countries like China, now you have, you know, a move towards compliance. Now, I'm not a Chinese specialist. You know, if you look into the accounts of Chinese banks, how transparent are they? There might be question marks. But 2 weeks ago, for instance, I was, yeah, I'll go quickly, at another seminar, and you had, you know, a lady more or less my age with some experience in the financial industry, and she was explaining that she had been hired by a Chinese bank, you know, to put in place their compliance department. And she said it's going to be an uphill battle because obviously there's going to be internal resistance. The cultural environment is different than one you have here, but at least it's moving in this direction. So just, you know, to fit the conclusion of the conclusion, if you want, the question now
conclusion of the conclusion
is, do we have an international or supranational paradigm for compliance? And I think we're living very interesting times because, as we said, most countries, including you know, the BRICS, you know, what used to be called the developing countries, are now embracing compliance. On the other hand, there seems to be a pushback in the United States. And this, I think, could be a discussion for a point that we may want to discuss a little bit later. So it's you know, people say the financial industry is boring. My friends, if you go into compliance, you are going to have challenges for many, many years to come.
Okay. Thank you for this first part, Michel. And on a spatial topic, sometimes not really clear and transparent. We know that now there is with the globalization, we have new requirements, more and more. The risk is also the bureaucracy linked to that. So for avoiding this aspect is, let's getting back to the practices of the people, and especially the managers. And you are leaders. You are at the top of different corporations. So could you illustrate, could you say what could be the main challenges for you for developing a responsible organization? What does it mean? What do you require to your managers for developing this kind of counterbalance of business aspect? How we can integrate more the different stakeholders? So, and please, could you give to our audience some concrete example as well? So, maybe May, about your business. What do you think about that? How you could develop that?
So it's very interesting that we're listening to banks, because I was on the board of a bank before, so I understand completely Dodd-Frank, and now they're trying to get rid of Dodd-Frank. And what does that mean to the consumers? We remembered it was because of the consumers in the mortgage industry that suffered greatly the 2008 crisis that Dodd-Frank was born, and all the bank has to comply. And they were always complaining because the CEO's pay is so tied with the performances and the compliance. In our industry, we don't have a Dodd-Frank. Thank goodness, it's 2,000 pages. So on the other side, we are heavily regulated by Consumer Safety Board, because let's face it, there's a fire. And in our case, it's also the chemicals that goes into the air. So from California to Arizona, as you know, they're very progressive in terms of protecting the ozone layer, what ingredients is potentially causing any damages to health or the environment. So from day one, as the CEO, my foremost job is to create a platform for my managers to deliver not only good product, great design, and great value, but also quality and social responsibility at the very beginning. As we grow into this new century where everything we do is not only under the microscope of our government, it's also increasingly the consumers, right? They can tweet about how bad one candle costs them, and it becomes well known. So for us, it's no longer answering to who we sell to, by the way. So we have three, I would say, different shareholders. Number one is people who directly buy from us. For example, the Target of the world. You probably have heard about Nike shoes that has been in the news because they use child labor, so to speak, in some developing countries. So all the major retailers and brands these days has very high levels of social standard. It's called social compliance. They will send teams of people to the factories that you use overseas, and they don't announce that. So one day they will show up and they say, we want to see pay record to make sure that compensations are fair. If there's overtime, these people have to be paid 1.5 times. And for every 15 workers, there has to be a bathroom, for example. So there's very high level scrutiny on social compliance level. And I'm very happy that our company over and over has passed and exceeded their requirement. And because it's built in, right, you ask everyone coming on board to make sure that you're not just meeting the requirement, you're exceeding it. Because once again, what's good for the workers is good for the business. So if you're providing a comfortable and healthy environment, you're going to win those workers more than the toy manufacturers down the street or the shoe manufacturers that hire child labor. Second important shareholder, I would say, is eventually the people that work with us. Not only our internal workers, that I really agree with your point of view. So for our women workers, we provide long-term and short-term disability. So if they choose to, they can stay at home longer, and we keep their job for them as long as they let us know a little bit early. But we're one of the first small companies that provide fertility leave so that the husband, the man working for us, can take up to 4 weeks with pay. Why? Because once again, we want them to participate in raising their families. We want them to be there for their wife and their newborn so that their life does not have to be interrupted. Does that take a toll on the productivity of our company? Absolutely. Is it good for the business? Absolutely, because we not only make sure that he is feeling taken care of, that his entire family are thankful for having a father around for that long. So to our retail, to our supplier, that's our external sort of member, we also want to make sure that they have the same social compliance in check, that their materials are going to come from a place where they're not buying from war-torn regions illegally. For example, a lot of our fragrances come from Africa. A lot of them come from South America. We don't want them to buy product that is endangered. Our amber, for example, is a product that is very controversial. So we want to make sure that they treat those materials with greater respect, with the least amount of damage to the environment. Lastly, of course, our biggest shareholder and stock shareholder in the sense of what is important to us to consider is consumers. As I said, in today's world, consumers have changed. In the last 10 years, particularly in the developed countries, we moved from consuming goods to consuming experiences, particularly the millennials. Rather than buying a lot of stuff and pack up the garage, they want to trade it to a great restaurant experience. They want to climb the mountains that they always dreamed of. They don't want to accumulate physical material things. They want memories that last a lifetime. And they want to work with people that have stand up for values that they recognize are important. They want to stand up for companies that treat their people right and create cultures that nurture the people. Uber is a case in point. Everybody understands it's a great company. What happened to them is that it's not acceptable anymore that what goes inside the company is going to ultimately either grow that business or destroy that business. So I think consumers are the brand owners. They are going to write the history of a company. And responding to them and being able to help them is going to be really the name of the game for the business. And if we are not clear about that, we just need to open our eyes, listen to Wells Fargo's fate, listen to Fox News' fate, where they did not want to fire that anchor for a very long time, and guess who pulls out all the advertising, right? That's because their consumers are offended by the position of not continuously taking a stand on sexual harassment. So to that end, I feel this topic of social responsibility is not just a very timely topic. On the academic level, I'd like to encourage you to share your thoughts with industries and really find the best practices that is transparent, is ongoing with consumers and with companies so that together we can build that dialogue of how we move forward.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your patience as well. And so how about your organization, Walter, on the same topic? Yeah, we changed a little bit. Wait.
He switched up on us. I was thinking, man, I got a little bit of time to think now. Social responsibility for a corporation, there's multiple layers, really, and stakeholders, as May was saying. But the one thing that we can never forget is that we are in a business, and as the owners or CEOs or managers or leaders of that company, it is important to recognize that if the company doesn't succeed financially, everybody loses. And we all have plenty of examples of companies that have not kept their eye on the financial bottom line and ended up going out of business. And everybody in the company, everybody in the community that relied upon that company, and consumers that liked the products of that company suffered. So that is, in the bottom line, the most important kind of, we have to keep our eye on that ball first. Having said that, though, I also believe that the next responsibility of a corporation is to understand that it fits into a larger community. That community, as we've talked so far, does include our employees. And I am a huge believer in the fact that the employee, not just senior management, not just the ownership of the corporation, but the employee making the product happen, making the organization run, contacting and being the face of the organization to the community, to the consumer, to the public, is an incredible responsibility for leadership to keep in mind. I have said that my business is a relatively small business in a very small town. So we are a little fish in a little pond, so we're a big fish in that particular pond. I want to talk about two things right now to give you an idea of what my life is like right now at the age and the place in the business that I'm in. First one is I want to talk about the business's, the corporation's responsibility at a tax level to the community. And I don't think this is talked about nearly enough. When I hear a story of an Enron story or the banking collapse of the 2007-2008, I'm a business guy, and quite frankly, those stories embarrass me. And they make me feel like the term business person is a very negative term. And that just bothers me. I remember being in a meeting probably 10, 15 years ago. It was a social group with business guys. And we're in Pennsylvania. And I think there was some tax issue that was coming up. And there was a guy at my table talking about what we called the Delaware loophole. I don't know if you understand that, but essentially, it's a way for a business to legally evade taxes. And very simply, here's how it works. A Pennsylvania company can create a legal branch of their company and center it in Delaware. Delaware does not have state taxes. So what they then do is that they put some responsibility for, it can be an office. It can have 2 people working in that office. But what they could do is they could say that that office owns the trademark rights to a huge product that's being produced, manufactured in Pennsylvania. Now, all of the work, all of the effort of that product, all of the profit that's generated from that product comes out of Pennsylvania. But the Delaware corporation requires the Pennsylvania company to pay them for the licensing fees. So if that corporation makes a profit of $10 million in a given year, they can have a fee of $10 million for the license. So all of the profits can be sucked out of Pennsylvania and put over to Delaware. Now, I'm not going to go into the whole issue of taxation and how complicated that is. I want to just focus back on, there was a guy in a meeting bragging to a group of business people about how he was using that. And everybody at the meeting agreed with him that that was completely legal. I stepped up and I said, that might be legal, but I'm sorry, I have a moral problem with that. I do not think that abides by my smell test. That's not right. And unfortunately, we still live in a world where that hasn't changed. But I think that as a business person, my social responsibility as a corporate business person is to fight for that change, because that's not right. The last thing I'll tell you is that I'm in the position, I'm not a young guy. I came into the business, and every meeting I was in, I was the youngest guy in the room. And now every meeting I go into, I'm the oldest guy in the room. So it just tells you how long I've been doing this. Yeah. So I have 3 children, and none of them are in a position to come into the business. So I get people all the time saying to me, what are you going to do with the business? Are you going to sell it? Are you going to, what are your plans? And I took a while and sort of looked at the idea of selling the business. And quite truthfully, the best way for me to sell my business is to go to a bank with an M&A, kind of mergers and acquisitions, and let them farm my business out. And my business has done extremely well the last couple of years. I could probably do pretty well selling the business. And I really went through that moral question of, boy, what are my priorities? One is I want to protect my family and the income that the business has made for us over the years, the value that the business has created. I went through the concept of it's in the family name, and can I sell it and now have somebody else take over the business? None of those really affected me. I could sell the business and have it go to somebody else. But what finally made the decision of what I was going to do, which was to decide not to sell the business, was the idea that the best way for me to get the most value is to sell it. But then the reality is whoever buys it will probably, 90% certainty, they will take my business and move it out of Colombia. And all of the people that have worked for that company and all of the history that this company has in that community will be gone. And in the end, I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. So I'm a small business. It's a family business. It's completely different than corporate America. But I wish corporate America would have more of the values that we in small business have. And part of a big reason why we have those values is because every day I go to work, I see my people. I face them. I talk to them. If I'm in a big corporate office, the Tommy Hilfiger, the corporate office is in Hong Kong, the board meeting is in Bermuda, the stock market in New York. There's no connection to people. And that, I think, is something that if we can, as a business community, begin to make our businesses more people-oriented, we will create a better world for ourselves.
Thank you so much. So you demonstrated that in a brilliant way that having compliances is not enough. It's also, and maybe mostly, a question of value and being clear on the practice regarding the value, right? So what about a big company?
Well, actually, ours is more local as well. But one of the things I want to applaud you is being socially responsible is about taking care of your people and about the legacy that you leave behind. And that is morally more responsible than farming things out. I know in our environment, the biggest stakeholder or the biggest guard, if you will, is social media. In our world, everything that we do is regulated by someone who sees, reads, or cameras, photograph, and puts something on the web. There is Travelocity, there is Facebook, and all these many different social media. So when you talk about the millennials today and you talk about the guard at the gate, in our world is clearly going to be social media. So a lot of the things that we did in the past, which would have been in the dark, are now coming to light. And so a lot of things that we have to do internally is to make sure that we cultivate socially responsible employees. That also means that it starts from the top and works its way down. And I clearly applaud you for those kinds of thoughts, because I come from a world where my wife was an HR director in the hotel business for 25 years. And the word that she told me when she got me into the business about 13 years ago is, it's not the guy in the suit and tie that gets the work done, it's the guy at the heart of the house. And who is the heart of the house? The heart of the house are those who are picking up your trash, who are cleaning your rooms, who are doing your laundry, who are cooking your food. Those are the guys that are heart of the house. And how do you treat those employees? How do you give them the respect and dignity that they deserve? And the way you do that is you honor them when they have a birthday, when they have any kinds of events in their lives. You have to respect them. You have to give someone that looks like they want to grow. You have to give them an opportunity to grow into another role. You have to cross-train them. You have to let them know that you are a valued employee. You can't just throw them out with the baby with the bathwater, because they are valuable people. These people have children, they have families, they have homes. Everybody wants the same thing we want. We all, especially as men, want to come home. We want to take care of our families. We want to take care of our homes. We want to feed them. We want to leave a legacy. None of us, no matter what your age or your nationality is, wants to not take care of your responsibilities. A lot of these positions are also handled by women. You have to be able to understand sexual harassment in the marketplace. You have to give sexual training. You cannot be an aggressor in our marketplace. We will catch you. There is a way to root these individuals out. There is a four-step process: verbal warning, written warning, final warning, exit. And we will put you out of the business. There is no doubt in my mind, because we have become socially responsible. We also know that whatever we do today is on social media today. Not tomorrow, but today. We are accountable. If our property falls below a certain score, we are out of the system. That's millions and millions of dollars that the owners and the employees will suffer. If you become deflagged, for an example, if you're no longer a Marriott brand or you're no longer a Hilton brand, and tomorrow you see another flag up there, many cases it's because they fell below the standards. There are people, when you speak in terms of people that come into the shops, mystery shoppers that will mystery shop our hotel, both on the phone as well as on the property. It could be someone in the audience that's a mystery shopper today who is writing a report about how you manage your property. You know, is the standard there? Is the carpets clean? All those little things that a lot of people don't pay attention to in the hotel business, we have to. The reason why is because you're investing your money. There's billions of dollars tied up in the hotel business. Wherever you go, you need a place to sleep, and you want to be regulated. You want it to be taken care of. There's another product that's in the marketplace that makes us pay attention as well, called Airbnb. Airbnb is a huge competitor. Any product that is taking money from the marketplace for a bed, as what we call heads in beds, is a competitor. So we have to be socially conscious of what we're doing. We have to upgrade our rooms. It's no longer cute to have a 1972 hotel and all the beds are creaking and cracking and the carpets haven't been changed and the walls haven't been painted. There's millions, billions of dollars going into hotels for renovations. Our hotel just went through a $7 million renovation. All the sleeping rooms were upgraded, carpets, beds, everything, air conditioning units. All of those things have to be taken care of. The key is that we have to be socially responsible of what we're doing. Profits are a wonderful thing, but if you don't take care of your people within the property and within the brand, you have nothing. It falls apart. We have a Starbucks on property. We have to make sure that we keep the regulations up with that as well. At the same time, if we take care of that, you will be able to go online and you can check reviews. Reviews will tell you whether or not you go to this brand or that brand. There's also loyalty programs, SPG, Starwood Performance Programs. There's Marriott Rewards Programs. There's Hilton Rewards Programs. You tend to go to places that you're comfortable with, that you like, that you, consistency in product and a value for your money. And that's where our business is. So from a socially responsible organization, though we're one little small P, and we've got hundreds of thousands of hotel rooms around the world. And if you've traveled around the world, you know the places you like to go, and you know a lot of the places you don't like to go. And so we are controlled by that factor. Thank you.
Thank you, Tyrone, about your sharing your vision and practices. So maybe a last short comment from the financial guy, but very quickly. Before having maybe one or two questions, a couple of questions from the room.
Just to follow up on what was just very eloquently said. So, you know, three points. One, I agree with you, a prerequisite for any business is to be economically and financially viable. If it's not viable, by definition, all the other problems and the business disappear. The second point is, you know, we live in a different, you know, those businesses which are international live in different jurisdictions. And a key thing is to make sure that your social values are aligned. Here, you mentioned, you know, family leave and the high consideration you have for your employees so they can have a normal or a healthy family life. That's great. Would a company like yours in China, in Latin America, and in Europe have the same values? And in fact, there are some slight differences. So this creates, you know, another set of issues. Unfortunately, you do not have, you know, same model. It's not a one size fits all. You have to adapt. And the third point, and I'll do it very briefly, but we could discuss for hours, is taxes. Actually, something, I think it's Galbraith who said there are only two certain things in life: death and taxes. But
let's take that aside a little bit because it's a so big topic. Yeah.
Just very briefly on that thing, is that it's fascinating to find out, you know, what used to be legal tax practice, you know, 10 years ago, now becomes illegal. Think about the Panama Papers. Think how the structure of your companies, your holding company, is going to change. And amazingly, there may be some homework to be done in the United States. You know, we want completely disclosure. What about those Delaware LLCs? You know, so, and the final conclusion, if you want, is that the only way we're going to solve those problems is through more international cooperation and forums, in fact, like ours.
Thank you for very interesting content. All of you. What you try is maybe having a question from the room, if there is one, very quickly. So we have one here and one over there. Okay, let's get your question.
Okay, right. Thank you very much for your presentation and for all the explanation you gave concerning responsibility. For me, I hear. Okay. Hello? Okay. Thank you. Okay. I say thank you very much for the presentation. For me, there are three kinds of company. First, those who don't want to talk about responsibility, and they don't talk about it and don't want to talk about it. The second group, those companies, they use strategies, rhetoric strategies, framing strategies to show that they do things for responsibility, for corporate social responsibility, but they do not think. And the last one, And I think you're among those group, those who do things and like talking about their experience. That's why I get from your speeches. So you all present, according to your experience, what is responsibilities, which is very interesting. You also present that a company, most of you I think, a company must or should generate revenue. And it's very interesting also. While generating revenue, that company or those companies should also try to satisfy consumer, to put strategies and also to provide goods, if you want product and service that meets consumer needs. And I was really impressed about it.
Sorry, but could you ask a question, please?
Yeah. You also gave your experience. But I have just one question concerning how can we evaluate what I call here corporate responsible behavior. You got experience, how can you evaluate that responsible behavior in your company? Is there anything, any strategy to evaluate that?
Very shortly, sorry, very hard.
I'm just going to give one quick answer. We all have children. Starts one at a time. No matter what the responsibilities are, starts with one person, you. You have to tell the next person. That person has to tell the next. Regardless of what's at the top, it begins at home. That's always been my feeling. If you take care of what's at home and you pass those morals along the line, it will eventually happen. But that's the only way I know, is one at a time.
From my experience, the best thing is coming from yourself as the leader and the founder of the company. You embedding those values into your practices, and you practice what you try to lecture. But most importantly, we also establish key performance indicators that are used to evaluate employees for promotions or financial promotions or job promotions. And those key performance indicators will include those values that we consider very important.
It all comes from the leadership top down. So, if you're the owner of the business, you're the most important one to set the tone. Then you have to make sure that the people immediately below you are setting the same tone as you are. It has to be consistent. You can talk about something like customer service as a real good example. If you ship a product and the customer isn't happy with it, I grew up with the whole idea the customer's always right. Well, that's not true. They're not always right. But from a company standpoint, we'll make it right for you. You have to be willing to take a loss on a customer to make that customer happy. We're in a 24-hour news cycle world today, but more than that, we are in a world, I used to say, one bad experience, one unhappy customer is worth 10 thrilled ones. That used to be true. That's no longer true. One bad customer is worth 1,000 positives, because one negative remark on a website, whether it's Expedia or on a Target or a whatever website that says, I didn't like this product, you can't undo that. So it has to start at the top. It has to be consistent all the way down through. And you have to live it and prove it every day.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Maybe another question, very briefly, over there. And the last one will be over there. Okay. And we have a little bit liberated before having the lunch. So
Hi.
I want to talk, you have the voice. So.
Just a short question, but key question for Michel. How do regulators from different countries should cooperate? How do you think about this? This question is true.
Okay, I can give you some elements of response from the financial industry, and it may vary from industry to industry. The key challenge now for the finance industry is to have a level playing field. In other words, if you want real competition, the rules must be the same all around the world, which is why you are going to need more and more international agreements. For instance, in terms of anti-money laundering, You have something called the GAFI in French, the FATF in English, which is an international task force which sets some rules. You have it, for different products, and you have an increase of international convention there. The other thing you will have, and that's even more difficult, is that you have to make sure that those rules are translated in more or less the same way at each national level. And the third requirement, I think, is that there must be similar norms in terms of training. In other words, if you are going to be a finance controller or the person in charge of making sure your KYC or know your customer procedures are identical, all the people have to be trained in the same ground. I think we're moving toward there, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
Okay, thank you. So we can get the question at the back, Wizard. Thanks. You will have the mic.
Firstly, just I want to thank you for the stimulating speeches. One of the things that I found it interesting is that you did present not just only your CSR strategy or process of responsiveness, but also the philosophical orientation. I mean, an individual orientation of it. I mean, your motives, what motivates you to implement CSR in your strategy, and your personal experience and your beliefs are as managers. So my question is, how do you choose the social issue to resolve? Did you take into account, into consideration the issue or your business activity in business sector, so that you are more pragmatic, and that will be also profitable for you and your organization in terms of competitor advantage, of the profitability of employees in cost management, or you are more open to other social and societal in general issues and you are more philanthropic in terms of if you respond to like poverty, health, disease, and education. So yeah, thank you.
That was a big question. What I think part of your question is how do we choose which issue we want to focus on at any given time? And that actually changes over time. And I'll give you the best example. I was very focused about 5-7 years ago on health insurance. As a small company, we always provided health insurance to our employees. That became a real problem, and I was very involved with that for a while. That's changing slightly for me, so it was just circumstances. But in terms of every day, how do we prioritize between the bottom line and efficiencies and people issues? I think good managers, really good managers, understand that you have to have fair policies, and everybody that works under that manager understands those policies. And then you have to adhere to those policies pretty strictly. So that, if you have to fire an employee, and none of us, that's probably the most difficult thing for us to ever do, fire an employee. Nobody ever wants to do that. But if you find yourself in the position that you need to think about the fact that you're doing it for everybody else in the company or in the department. Because if you're firing somebody in the department, it's probably because they're not doing their job. They're not holding up their end of the bargain. And if you go and talk to everybody else, they'll know it. And although they don't want that person to be fired, it's good for the organization. So you got to keep looking at the big picture, but then be fair with the individual people.
Have you worked
Each of you, very quickly.
Very quickly, if I just answer the part about how you decide and evolve the mission you want to engage yourselves in. For me, because I'm an immigrant and I'm a woman entrepreneur, I've always stayed on course with those three issues: the rights of immigration, women's empowerment and entrepreneurship, and lastly, entrepreneurship itself. But for the last 20 years, what I have found is that because my consumers are 90% women, if they're better off, if they're getting equal pays in their job, if they have an opportunity when they start a company, as we know, 90% of the women-owned company is under $1 million large. It's very difficult for them to grow. So mentoring them has become my new passion. Recently, I have joined the State Department to mentor women from particularly developing and war-torn regions. I mentored a woman from Indonesia who designed fashion, but for 20 years, her business has kept to be under $500,000. So I mentored her, and I continually think this is where my future is to continually mentor women in my company, in the business that I work with, but most importantly, mentoring women in developing countries so they can supply to people like me and my customers, because that's the best way to really grow them and to help them and their family, because as we know, if a mother is happy, the family is happy. And it doesn't make me lose anything, because I like to leave with this one remark for all of us. A candle loses nothing by lighting up another.
Thank you. I'm very short, not a problem at all. I just firmly believe in reaching back and helping the next one behind me. As a black male from the ghettos of Washington, D.C., I just firmly believe that if you believe, you can achieve. If you fall down on your back. If you can look up, you can get up. And I firmly believe in doing that. And I've done that with several managers, several people in my property and other properties. I just firmly believe in reaching back and pulling someone along the way with me. Thank you.
Thank you for everything. I would like to say in one way during this presentation, we can remember that 50 years ago, there was a famous economist saying that the only responsibility of the company is doing business. What we have seen this morning is, of course, this is the number one, the top of the list, doing business and having revenue. But in another way, we demonstrated this morning that top managers have in their minds that they have to manage the different stakeholders. In responsibility is not only a question of law or a question of compliances. Of course, it's very important, but this is also a question of practice, and in one way, this is a question of style of management and the way of managing the company. So thank you for demonstrating that and giving something to feed to our academics, and I would like to thank you very warmly, all of you. Thanks very much on behalf of everybody.